Welcome back to another edition of the Knight Report podcast. I'm your host, Mike Broadbent. Joining me once again is my co-host, Richie O'Leary, and special guest to the pod. You might recognize him from last year. It's David Cunningham of TechSideline. He's the managing editor there. David, thanks so much for coming on to talk about this big game on Saturday in Lane Stadium.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me on. It was really, really fun last year when we got to chat, and excited to do it again.
We're going to go through everything pertaining to this matchup and more. But first, this podcast is presented to you by Knight and Day Apparel. Get ready for football and tailgating season with Knight and Day Apparel. Our apparel is designed to keep you comfortable and stylish from the pregame excitement to the final whistle. Whether you're grilling in the parking lot or cheering from the stands, our high-quality gear has you covered with unbeatable comfort and team spirit. Use our promo code Rutgers Rivals to get 10% off your purchase. Score big this season and keep shopping with Knight and Day Apparel. All right, so David, obviously last year, when Rutgers and Virginia Tech played, things were kind of up in the air for both programs. Rutgers fans didn't really know how the offense was going to be aligned. You know, we all thought the backup running back, Sam Brown, was going to be leading us, and Kyle Monangai ended up leading the Big Ten in rushing. It was the first game Kyron Drones started in his Virginia Tech career. What are the general vibes around the Virginia Tech program right now, and kind of how have things changed from the last time we met to right now with Virginia Tech?
Well, I think Virginia Tech's season looked like it was going down the drain after the Rutgers game last season. The Hokies got off to a 1-3 start, and then they turned it around. They won 6 of their last 7 games, went to a bowl game. Kyron Drones really kind of found his groove. He and Bashal Tutin, the running back, they became quite a 1-2 punch towards the end of the year where Tech found its identity, was running the ball a lot. They beat a pretty good Tulane team in the Military Bowl, albeit a team that had a lot of guys opt out. So the vibes coming into the season were very high. I think a lot of Virginia Tech fans were talking about this team winning 8-9 games because the Hokies brought about 20 starters back from last year. This is a group that brought back everybody on offense except for one player. Defense brought back mostly everybody and then plugged a couple holes. Defensive tackle Aeneas Peebles came in from Duke. He was an all-conference pick. They needed a Mike linebacker. They brought in Sam Brumfield from Middle Tennessee. So the fans thought, I think, that this was going to be a really, really good team this year. You bring everybody back, you take one step forward, and you plug the holes you need to. And then the Hokies come out in game 1 at Vanderbilt, and they were just flat. They did not play well. They got behind 17-3. They come back and almost had a chance to win and blew it. Last 2 weeks have been better. They beat Marshall and Old Dominion, but I think this fan base looks at this 2-1 team and goes, man, is this team real or fake? There are too many questions about the Hokies right now, too much inconsistency. There's a lot of talent, but at the same time, they have not come out and shown that, A, they can beat a good team under Brent Pry yet. I mean, this is going on year 3, and Virginia Tech has yet to beat a good team with this coaching staff. And B, there are way too many inconsistencies. So that's, I think, the kind of the tone of the fan base right now. They're excited and they're happy, and they're still going to sell out every game, but they expect a better product on the field. And I think it's fair considering that this staff is in year 3 and they look like they knew what they were doing at the end of last year. And then Tech kind of just came out flat at the beginning of the year. It's always something new, it feels like. So I'm curious to see how Tech comes out this week because I think that'll be very, very telling.
I mean, just going based on the scores alone, obviously is an ugly loss to start, but then 2 wins. Do you think Tech got better from the Vandy game to Old Dominion, or is the competition just a lot worse?
I think Tech got better, yeah, for sure. I think Tech started to find its identity more. I think one of the big questions was, if you brought everybody back, how would you not know what your identity was going to be? But Tech has, very similar to Rutgers, I guess, Tech has decided it's going to run the ball more and establish the run every game, which is something that it did really well last year, and then it kind of got away from in that first game. I thought it did a really good job against Marshall of doing that, especially in the second half. And then Old Dominion off the rip, I think it did a good job. And last game, Virginia Tech played Old Dominion. scored 14 points on its first 2 drives. That was the first time under Brent Pry, so in 3 seasons, that the Hokies scored 14 points in the first quarter. So we're talking about a team that had been known for slow starts, started fast. So I think the team is getting better. I think the defense has been much improved since the first game. But then again, you look at the opponents and Marshall and Old Dominion, not really the biggest tests there. So I think Tech has improved. At the same time, I'm a little hesitant to say that this was a big jump, because at the end of the day, I don't think Vanderbilt was that good of a team either. I think it was just kind of a week 1 game.
Yeah, it's funny. There's a lot of like looking in the mirror for these two programs, because both were talked about as kind of CFP dark horse teams before the season started. You heard some dueling coach speak between Brent Pry and Greg Schiano this week. Schiano in his presser said Virginia Tech has between 8 to 10 draft picks on their team. And then Brent Pry says, Rutgers has 8, 9, maybe 10 draft picks on their team. So they both kind of want to have the same identity. I think Rutgers' identity is pretty solidified. How solidified would you say Virginia Tech's? I know you said that they want to run the ball. Would you say that identity is clear in the program for the team? Because it seems like sometimes they want to pass the ball a lot. Sometimes they want to run the ball a lot. Would you say internally that identity is pretty defined both on offense and defense for Virginia Tech?
No, I think that is one of the weird parts, is that Virginia Tech ran the ball so well at the end of last season and brought back its entire offensive line, its quarterback, its running back. The wide receivers are all back too. The only player Tech lost was a tight end. And yet Virginia Tech didn't feel like it wanted to establish the run in the first 2 games, right? It said it did, but it didn't really come out and do it. And I think the play calling has been a little hit or miss, or at least was early. I think it was better against Old Dominion. I think Tech says it wants to establish a run, and Brent Pry talks all about, hey, we have to be able to run the ball. But the Hokies haven't really gone out and done it consistently, and I think that's the big thing. I think on the defensive side of the ball, the Hokies kind of know what they want to do there. It's more of a matter of just going out and executing, and they've got some really, really good cornerbacks. Tech's pass defense has been fantastic. The problem is the run defense, kind of like last year, where Kyle Monangai and Gavin Wimsatt ran all over Virginia Tech. The run defense needs to be better. So I think that's kind of what's frustrating for some Virginia Tech fans right now, is that the coaching staff says they want to run the ball and then gets kind of hesitant with it. Not really all systems go towards it, which I feel like Rutgers is very much, hey, we know exactly what we want to do, and we're going to do that. We're going to run the ball. We're going to kind of simplify things, and we're going to run the ball every play. I think Virginia Tech is kind of wants to be that, but hasn't necessarily fully committed to that, and I think that's why it's frustrating. And I get it a little bit from the coaching staff's perspective. Virginia Tech has all these wide receiver weapons. I mean, this is a wide receiver room that can probably go like 6-7 guys deep. Really, really, really talented. At the same time, the offensive line and the quarterback and running back, they are not necessarily set up to throw the ball 30 times a game. So you have to find this balance. And I think the Hokies have really had trouble a little bit finding this balance. I thought it was better the last 2 games, but still not great. But they have to run the ball first, and I think that's what kind of trips them up sometimes.
Now, do you think that hesitancy to run the ball is because a guy like Bishal Tutin isn't 100%? And it sounds weird not to say 100% because he was limited last week and this week, but then proceeded to run for 115 yards last week.
Yeah, I think they have realized that they have to give Bishal Tutin the ball any time. He's a guy, he was banged up last week and had 22 carries. And then was banged up this week and had 21 carries and ran for over 100 yards both times. He's a machine. He's a wrecking ball. And he is, in my opinion, the most important player on this offense. They have to get him the ball because it opens up so much. And I think the staff has understood that Bishal Tutin needs the ball in his hands, all season long. I think it's more of just sometimes Tech gets lulled into, spreading the ball out and, Tootin might go, one drive, say it's a 5 or 6 play drive, Tootin might only get one touch on that drive, right? And so I think Tech needs to do a better job of being more consistent. But I think everybody knows around the program that he is kind of the workhorse, I guess very similar to Monangai, where he's the guy who needs to create for them. And Tech needs to play off of that. Tech has the receivers and some really good tight ends. But I will say the offensive line has been a question through the first couple of weeks. I think the offensive line's been better, but we saw at the beginning of the year very shaky at times, very, I don't want to, maybe tough for Tootin to run behind a little bit. Drones has not necessarily had as much time as he'd like. So this is an offensive line that can be susceptible to really good defenses. And I think Virginia Tech has been exposed a little bit at times. But I think if you're the Hokies, you establish the run and then play off of it, and hope teams commit to the run. And so far, teams have. So I think the Tootin identity is clear. It's just whether a matter of Virginia Tech can continue to do it, for 4 quarters or not.
Yeah, I have a lot of questions for your offensive line because it kind of folds into an injury question. Last week, your best lineman, Xavier Chapman, gets hurt during warmups. Brent Pry said he got kicked pretty good, and I think he came out for like 1 or 2 plays, and then he just couldn't go anymore. Laith Ghanem is also banged up, the left guard. The Moore brothers seem to be pretty solid at center and right guard, but I've read a lot about Parker Clements from your fan base, mainly bad. So what is the general state of the offensive line? Who do you expect to see on Saturday? And I know that I think it was Johnny Garrett filled in pretty admirably last week in a short-term notice at left tackle. But what's the general state of the offensive line, and injury-wise, who do you expect to see?
Yeah, Xavier Chaplin, I mean, he's the best player on Virginia Tech's offensive line, like you said, and he's at left tackle. This is his second year starting. And yeah, it was very weird. It looked like he got rolled up in warm-ups. Brent Pry said he got kicked. He came in, played 2 plays, got hit a little weird, and had to go off and did not come back. I mean, the way Brent Pry talked about it, I don't anticipate him playing, honestly.
Oh, wow.
Maybe it's too early in the week to talk about it. No, we get to view practice on Wednesday evenings, so maybe we'll see him at practice and working out. I think there's probably a slight chance he plays, but my guess is that if it was as bad as it was on Saturday, where he could not go after 2 plays, then Virginia Tech's probably going to roll with Johnny Garrett again. I mean, that's a young guy who, he played all but 2 snaps in that Old Dominion game, but that was really his first consistent collegiate action. I think Laith Ghanem has been pretty good, but he's also a redshirt freshman, and this is his first year getting real reps. Bob Schick is a guy that Tech has rotated in there at guard. He's an experienced guy. He started for the Hokies all last year. But if you lose Chaplin and Ghanem's banged up, that is a very shaky part of the offensive line. The Moore brothers are good. Parker Clements is kind of the Virginia Tech fan base's scapegoat, I think. A lot of hate targeted his way. He is hit or miss as well. The Hokies are better, I think, or have been better at times in pass protection, but I think they have struggled to get a push up front. They looked fine against Old Dominion, but again, Old Dominion is a group of 5 front from the Sun Belt, right? When I look at this Rutgers front, I'm very, very impressed, and I think that's a group that's going to give Virginia Tech real trouble. And offensive line could be a big piece for Virginia Tech this weekend, because if Xavier Chaplin can't go, that is an experienced guy that you're missing in your most important game to date this year. So I worry a little bit. I don't think Virginia Tech is fully healthy up there. I think Ghanem is fine to play, but he's a guy that Virginia Tech has rotated around because he's so inexperienced. So, and the Hokies haven't really rotated on the right side of the line yet. So it's a very small group. I think Rutgers probably has the advantage there if Chaplin can't go, just because Chaplin's a workhorse. but he did not look good. I mean, he went down after the second play of the game last week and was walking gingerly on the sideline for the whole game. So I'm not, unless something magically changed in the last couple of days, I would not expect him to play.
So in reference to the Virginia Tech offensive line, they gave up 4 sacks versus Vandy and Marshall and then 0 versus Old Dominion. Kind of just basically explain to me how that happens.
Well, I think Virginia Tech really got into some bad situations against Vanderbilt where it was obvious the Hokies were going to pass. Like one of those sacks came on the final play of the first half where Kyron Jones was trying to find something, held the ball too long. I think Kyron Jones has really improved from week 1 to week 3. And I will say that you asked me about growth earlier. I think Kyron Jones has really gotten better. It felt like he was holding on to the ball way too long in that first week where he was seeing stuff. Vanderbilt kind of dropped 8 guys behind the ball playing zone, and he was having a hard time figuring out what he was seeing and where he wanted to go with the ball. And Vanderbilt's pressure just got to him. There were a couple missed assignments there, but I think a lot of that was more on him and the play calling. Against Old Dominion, I mean, that's not a Big Ten front or anything. So I'm not surprised. I thought the pass blocking was better, but at the same time, the Hokies only ran the ball, or the Hokies only threw the ball 6 times in the second half. Right? Virginia Tech got up early. There weren't really too many opportunities for the Hokies to get in a bad situation because they were in a good spot for the majority of 60 minutes, and they really decided they were just going to run the ball. I think they ran it 51 times and only threw it a handful. So this Rutgers test, when I look at it, I'm like, if Rutgers can kind of take Tech's running game away and make the Hokies throw it, we will see if I assume the Scarlet Knights will be able to get a little bit of pressure against this offensive line that's banged up a little bit. So I think that could really be a turning point in this game. And that's all the more reason why Virginia Tech needs to establish the run first, because if it can, Kyron Jones is great with the ball in his hands, but if the offensive line is susceptible, even more so this week than weeks prior because of injuries and whatnot, this is not the week where you really want him, I don't think, dropping back and holding the ball, for a handful of seconds trying to find open receivers. Now, Virginia Tech has so many weapons out there, it's hard not to. But this is a week where balance in the offense, play calling and what you're running, it's very key.
I do want to dive deeper into Kyron Jones in the offense, but I just want to touch on Virginia Tech's injuries really quick. We already talked about Tootin being banged up and Xavier Chaplin being banged up. Who are some other guys that are hurt for Virginia Tech that are either questionable or for sure out? And just when you mention them, just talk about like where they sit on the depth chart.
Yeah, well, so we mentioned Chaplin. Brody Meadows is actually banged up a little bit behind him. Ollie Jennings, one of Virginia Tech's starting wide receivers, is banged up. He left the Old Dominion game, which is his former school, in the late first half and did not come back. Brent Pry said it was a little bit of a tweak, and he was not. He felt comfortable if Ollie Jennings had to go back in, but they kind of just kept him out. So I expect him to play. I expect Garrett to be fine. Bashal Tootin is banged up. I'm sure he will not be touched all week in practice, and he will be fine to go for Saturday. Linebacker Kelly Lawson is an interesting one. He's kind of the backup at will right now. He occasionally plays starting snaps. He's a guy that they feel comfortable about rotating in there, and he got banged up with about 3 or 4 minutes left in that game against Old Dominion on Saturday. I don't know what the extent of that injury is. I'm not sure if he'll play or not. And then that's not even counting the guys who have been out. Tight end Nick Gallo's out. Safety Jalen Stroman, he got hurt in that Vanderbilt game. He's a guy who's been banged up his whole career. He's Virginia Tech's best safety, and he is not. He played the first half of the game against Vanderbilt and has not played since. I do not expect him to play.
He's got a broken collarbone, right? Or that's what the rumored injury is?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, he's had his arm in a sling. Pry has not specifically addressed it, but I believe it's a collarbone. He's got his arm in a sling. So, linebacker Will Johnson is a guy who he's kind of buried in the two deep, but he's a guy who starts on all the special teams. So Virginia Tech's a little bit banged up right now. Nothing maybe too serious outside of Tootin, Jennings, and Chaplin. But at the same time, if that starts to pile up and you've got some problems on your hands. I don't think it's anything that will set Virginia Tech back too bad, especially if Tootin's fine. I think the Hokies should be all right there. Chaplin's the other big one. I expect Jennings to play. So, yeah, Tech's a little bit banged up all across the board.
Yeah, as is Rutgers. Rutgers is currently in the first two games, it was without arguably its top edge rusher in Wesley Bailey. Obviously, Mohamed Toure tore his ACL in camp. He's probably the best linebacker, the second best linebacker. The linebackers were expected to be the strength of the Rutgers team. And the other guy, Tyreen Powell, has not played yet either. Virginia Tech fans should be familiar with him. He was a one-time commitment to the Hokies. Mm-hmm. And then backup running back Sam Brown, the guy I mentioned earlier, who a lot of Rutgers fans last year thought would be the lead dog in the backfield. He's been banged up. So I think we're both kind of pretty nicked up for early in the season. So it'll be interesting to see who's on the availability report and who's able to go. Kind of swinging back to Virginia Tech's offense, I did notice that as well about Kyron Drones. It seemed like because I've watched every Virginia Tech game from start to finish this year, which is kind of weird. I usually don't do that for an opponent, but I think both of our teams understood how big of a deal this game was for both of our seasons, especially if we were hoping to hit the high end of the outcomes. It seemed like in the Vanderbilt game, he wanted to kind of turn everything into like backyard football. He wasn't taking those easy dump offs. He was going big game hunting a lot. Sometimes it worked, like late in the game to Ollie Jennings. He had that deep touchdown and it kind of brought him back into the game. But sometimes, it sets you up at, third and nine. How many third and longs did you guys have in that game where it was just like borderline impossible to get those first downs? Whereas against Old Dominion, it seemed like he was much more willing to play in the structure of your offense, and it just looked crisper. But he still had some of those backyard elements. The one that comes to mind is that bad snap deep in your territory. He's able to scoop it up, scramble around a bit, and find a wide open Jalen Lane for like 46 yards. So it's really tough to take that out because I think that's where some of his best plays come from. Is that something that the coaching staff has kind of tried to, not totally tame his inclinations? I know Brent Pry said, he has no problem with trucking defensive backs down the field because that's kind of like what gets him going. But do you think that they're trying to kind of get him to fit a little bit better into like a more of a structured offense, or are they just kind of letting it be the Kyron Drones show?
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned that. He had that play where he ran down the sideline and trucked a bunch of defenders. Mm-hmm. That's kind of who he is. He's got that mindset, and he's great at it. I mean, he's insanely tough to bring down. But at the same time, I think they're trying to find a balance. I think they want him to be a little bit more of a pocket passer. I know when we talked to Kyron Drones before the season, that's something he wanted to work on. He wanted to be able to sit in the pocket a little bit more and be a more accurate passer. He wanted to get his completion percentage up. At the same time, I think he's kind of at his best when he's rolling outside of the pocket and he has an opportunity to run or can look downfield and kind of make something out of nothing. You mentioned that play, that really bad snap. That could have been a play that shot Tech in the foot in that game against Old Dominion.
Yep.
I mean, Kyron Drones scooped that up, made something out of nothing, found a receiver, and Jalen Lane just happened to pick up 40 yards down the sideline. A really just how in the world did that happen play. Yep. I think Drones is playing with a lot of confidence. I think the biggest challenge for Virginia Tech is to play to his strengths. We saw against Old Dominion how well he runs the ball. I mean, he had over 100 rushing yards in that game. He's a weapon in that part of it as well. I think if Kyron Drones can, again, like you said, find a little bit more balance in the structure of the offense, I think there are enough weapons there that he can succeed. But I think he's gotten in his own head a couple times this year, especially like early against Vanderbilt. Hokies get down in a hole early. I think it was kind of like he was trying to earn it all back in one play, so to speak. He was, he trying to beat the whole Vanderbilt defense on one play. I think if he just kind of settles down and plays within the structure, he'll be fine. But I also think it's part on Tyler Bowen, the offensive coordinator, to set him up for success well, because we've seen both sides of the coin where Virginia Tech, is productive and Kyron Drones look good. And then we've also seen where Virginia Tech struggles and Kyron Drones is a little shaky back there.
Talk to me a little bit more about this wide receiver room. It's been 3 weeks for Virginia Tech and 3 different leading receivers. And the guy that was leading receiver last year for the team and against Rutgers, and Daquan Felton's kind of been little MIA, which is a little odd, or is it just the fact that this wide receiver room's that deep?
Well, I think the tough part is it's any guy can kind of come up and have his game any week. That's the deepest room on the team, in my opinion. Jalen Lane is a guy who's been phenomenal lately. He's a Middle Tennessee transfer 2 years ago. He was kind of the second option last year, usually operates out of the slot, very speedy. He had a punt return for a touchdown against Marshall. So he's, very, very capable on special teams. And he had a couple really big plays in that Old Dominion game. He had over 100 yards receiving in the first quarter. Ollie Jennings is kind of the guy I think people are surprised has not really gotten going. He had that big touchdown against Vanderbilt. But outside of that, he's been very, very quiet. Now, he was banged up and did not come back against Old Dominion. And then Daquan Felton, I think, is an interesting guy. He had a touchdown or two against Rutgers last year. He really came into his own, I think, as the season went along. And he has been quiet. He had a touchdown against Marshall, but has not done much. And I think it's more so just the Hokies have so many people they're trying to get the ball to. It's nothing against those guys. But it's the ball has to go somewhere and has to be spread out. I think the kind of unsung hero in that room is Stephen Gosnell. He's a veteran. Yeah. He tore his ACL in the Military Bowl last year in December, and he came back and had 2 huge plays of 240-plus yard receiving plays in the first 2 games of the year. One of them was a laying out diving catch that he made. It was fantastic against Marshall.
That one against Marshall was incredible. Rutgers fans, I was telling you guys about this earlier. It reminded me a lot of the Jaquay Jackson catch against Temple, where it was like he beat his guy by 3 steps down the sideline. And if it was a perfect pass, it would have been an 80-yard touchdown, but it was thrown over his head and he had to literally fully extend. If he had, if he was 1 inch shorter, he wouldn't have caught it.
Yeah. He's a guy who kind of puts it all on the line every play. Like he reckless abandon, doesn't really care. He's consistent. So, I mean, those are your top 4 wide receivers. And then Tech has a couple other guys behind them, Aiden Green, Takai Heath and Xavier Turner-Bradshaw are kind of gadget guys that we saw get some action last year and do some stuff. Heath had a carry against Vanderbilt, I believe. But I think the toughest part is that Tech has gotten behind the chains, put itself in 3rd and long situations in some of these games, and has not been able to operate on schedule. Brent Pry has talked about, it's just been too easy to get us off schedule. And I think if you're the Virginia Tech offensive coordinator and Tyler Bowen, it's probably a little frustrating because you've got so many weapons. You want to try to get the ball to everybody. But when you're playing from behind or you're playing behind the sticks, you have to worry about getting out of that spot first before you can kind of worry about dispersing the ball around. So I think Virginia Tech's wide receivers, have been good this year. The problem is the Hokies haven't really gotten them the ball enough. And it's also a little bit weird because it's kind of like contrasting styles, because you've got a running back in Facial Tootin who is terrific and needs the ball. And at the same time, you've got an extremely deep wide receiver room that wants to go make plays. So it's kind of a challenge for Tyler Bowen to balance that on a consistent basis.
Yeah, no, it's a champagne problem to have where you have talent. It's just trying to not only fit that talent into something that works, but also there's a lot of egos, I'm sure, in that room. And it's same on any football team. If you know you're a good player and you're not getting the ball, if you don't have a good culture, which it seems like Virginia Tech does have one, it can get kind of ugly, especially if you're not winning. So it's not an easy balance to maintain, like you kind of were talking about. We talked a lot about offense. Let's talk about some defense. Virginia Tech has really, it looks very similar in terms of like statistics to Rutgers offense. You guys have played really well in the past game and struggled a bit in the run game on defense. Talk about some of the strengths on Virginia Tech's defense, both at the position units and just general strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, I think Virginia Tech's defensive line is one of its biggest strengths. Anton Powell-Ryland, Hokies defensive end, he played in that game against Rutgers last year. He had 4 sacks against Old Dominion the other day. He's kind of a dynamo, it's tough because I don't think had really gotten much production in those first 2 games, at least nothing that showed up on the stat sheet, and then he comes out and gets 4 sacks against Old Dominion. The only other Virginia Tech player in history to have 2 4-sack games is Bruce Smith, the Hall of Famer. So that's elite category for APR. He's one of the biggest guys to watch out for. Aeneas Peebles, I mentioned him earlier. He's a Duke transfer. He has not necessarily had a lot of impact statistically, but he has had quite the push up front at defensive tackle. I think he's a guy who can kind of cause a lot of problems up there. Virginia Tech's defensive line is sound. Hokies rotate about 10 guys between end and tackle. So it's a pretty deep group. But I think the biggest strength is the cornerbacks. Dorian Strong is back, and he's terrific. He's a guy who did not allow more than 10 completions last season. Mansour Delane is the guy right beside him. And Delane had a shaky first game against Vanderbilt, and he's bounced back with 2 interceptions in 2 games. So he's playing at a much higher level. Dante Lovett is a young guy who he's only he's only a sophomore, but he's come in and he's played well. He had 3 pass breakups against Marshall. So the defensive back room, specifically the corners, are a big strength. I think it's really the linebackers that is the biggest question. The safeties have been okay so far. Jalen Jones and Mose Phillips, 2 guys who played in that game against Rutgers last year. They were very young then, very inexperienced. They're much better now, much more consistent. The linebackers have really been the problem. Sam Brumfield comes in at Mike, and he's been okay, but I feel like we haven't really noticed his presence as much. Tech has been all right so far this year, but has struggled to contain big runs. Tech has been really, really good against your basic everyday run, and then against Vanderbilt it was 1, against Marshall it was 2, against Old Dominion it was 3 big runs. It's you can stop guys all day on your regular plays, but you can't allow big plays, and that's what Virginia Tech has struggled against. And of course, Virginia Tech's going up against Kyle Mungai this week, who's explosive, and everybody listening to this podcast, I'm sure, knows what Kyle Mungai can do. And that's the biggest challenge. Virginia Tech has to be able to not allow the big plays, because it has been all right, I think, everywhere else. It's just, a random, there were, Mike, if you watched the Old Dominion game, there was that kind of quarterback.
The QB
keeper,
run.
Yeah, where that's Old Dominion's backup quarterback that basically pulled a read option and went for 65 yards for a score, and nobody had him. And talked to Brent Pry after the game, and he said, "Yeah, that was just a miscommunication on our part. One of our guys up front basically communicated, or the signal he interpreted was that it was going to be a dive. So the part of the Hokies keyed in on was a dive." And then the guy pulls it around, right? So just like little tiny simple stuff where it's like
that was CJ McCray, right? Because he didn't play another snap after that.
Yeah, So it's like and he's a veteran, right? Those are mistakes you can't make. So it's like Tech has been, I would say, like 75% or 80% solid this year on defense, but the other like 15-20% is extremely worrying, just because it's big plays. Mansour Delane got picked on in that first game. Now he's looked really good since, but that unit, I think, this is a big test for them, because they've been okay. Can they come out and play well against a really good team? I'm very interested to see how they stack up.
That's what I was kind of going to touch on a little more. Is it just as simple for the rushing defense, just their linebackers just not being able to communicate well, or is it just the fact that they can't stop anyone in general? Because the rushing yards against them are so intriguing, because like 243 in last week, but 68 of it came on the last drive, mostly against second string. Then like 130 against 147 against Marshall, and 200 something against Vandy, but 100 of that came from the quarterback. Is it just as simple as they're stopping the run game, but they're just not preparing for like the keepers from the quarterback and stuff like that? Or
Honestly, it's the linebackers are probably the most difficult, most frustrating position group to figure out on this team. The Hokies continue to rotate there. The guy who will start at will linebacker this week is Caleb Woodson. He was the backup at star or Sam linebacker last year. The linebackers coach, Chris Marv, who's the defensive coordinator, he has kind of cross-trained all of these guys, and I think there's not really any consistency. Besides Sam Brumfield, he was brought in specifically to play Mike linebacker. Everybody's kind of been trained to play everywhere. So I think these guys are just not really great at one spot. They're just kind of like okay across the board, and I think you see that at times. I think in that first game against Vanderbilt, the Commodores ran outside of the tackles so much that the defensive line couldn't really get much of a push. It was a lot of read option and keepers around the end, and Tech lost contain more than anything. That Marshall game, Marshall's not a great offense. Tech did okay. I mean, Marshall threw like 30-something passes in that game. Didn't really run the ball. But Marshall still had like a 69-yard run in that game, just a little trap play, and busted it, and one of the linebackers or safeties missed a tackle, and it just went for a long game. And then you look at this Old Dominion game where quarterback has a big run. It's just like one or two plays every game where the Hokies have just been out of position. And I walk into this game going, okay, what play are the Hokies going to be out of position for, right? How far is Kyle Monangai going to take that ball? So it's weird. That position group, the linebackers, they are all pretty experienced now, but nobody's like standing above anybody else. Like the staff continues to rotate, and it's very confusing. The linebacker play was a problem last year. Virginia Tech's run fits were a problem against Rutgers last year. Tech got gashed by Marshall last year. Granted, the herd had Rasheen Ali, but this is a group that has struggled to defend the run under Brent Pry, been better so far this year, but then you see the big plays and go, what in the world's going on? So I'm skeptical about this. I think the pass defense has been really, really good, and Virginia Tech can rush the passer all day. But at the same time, this is a game where Rutgers probably won't have to throw it much. So I think that kind of plays right into Rutgers' hands a little bit.
And on top of that, their linebacking group, Virginia Tech, has been pretty banged up this year. I know Kelly Lawson's been dealing with something that hasn't really been like revealed, but the things I've read about him is he's been nicked up. You know, like you said, that he keeps rotating guys in and out based on whether it be like who's played better that week in practice, or, you know, this guy just blew a huge assignment, he's done for the rest of the game. And you were talking about, you know, cross training. Sometimes if you're a jack of all trades, you're kind of a master of none. And it sounds like outside of Brumfield, doesn't sound like any of the linebackers have really solidified, I am the Will, or I am the, you know, Sam linebacker, or the star linebacker, whatever you guys call it in your defense. So is that kind of an element of it as well? Is there's like a little bit of a turmoil at the linebacker position for physical and mental reasons?
Yeah, I think so. One of the most interesting things is that Jaden McDonald, he was Virginia Tech's starting will linebacker at the end of last season, and he was playing really well, better than anybody had played all year, and he was kind of the odd man out in camp this year, and now he's been banged up, and he did not play last week. He's been out with injury. Kelly Lawson, I think, he is one of the most athletic freaks I've ever been around. He's huge. At the same time, I think he has just not been able to grasp some of the mental aspects of playing will linebacker, and he's been kind of moved around. I think it's exactly what you said. It's, you know, jack of all trades, but also, you know, master of none, right? Like these guys have played so many different spots. Some of these guys have have played, Sam and Will, or some of these guys have played Mike and Will, or some of these guys have, I don't think anybody's played Mike and Sam, but it's kind of all over the place where these guys are being thrown around, and everybody, I think when you talk to them, you talk to a player at practice or something, they're like, yeah, it's fine, right? But I wonder, like, if they could actually like vent, if they needed to, like, what would their reaction be? I don't think that it's necessarily working out for Virginia Tech. And the most interesting part of it is that Brent Pry is a former linebackers coach. Like, the head coach is a former defensive coordinator who coached linebackers. This is his philosophy. This is his style. Chris Marv, the defensive coordinator and linebackers coach, like, wasn't, like a 3 or 4 time All SEC player at Vanderbilt at linebacker. These guys know the position, and yet Virginia Tech just cannot get good linebacker play. It's very weird. It's very odd, and at times it's to Tech's demise. I think we've seen it a couple times last year. We've seen it a couple times this year where the linebackers have just been out of position, and it bites Tech in the butt, and there goes a long play. And so that is my biggest question defensively this week is, what do the linebackers show up? Do they play competent football? Because if not, it could be a field day for Kyle Monangai.
Mm-hmm. Kind of touching on that a tiny bit, I guess. So Jalen Stroman was your best safety, if I had to guess, and he was injured in the first game. He's likely not back, you said, right?
Yeah.
So how much of a step down is the backup, and how is he in coverage? Because Rutgers tends to do this little inside zone where they take a glance at the safety before obviously deciding what they're going to do. Yeah,
Jalen Jones and Mose Phillips are the two guys back there, and they have been actually very impressive this season. Mose Phillips is a true sophomore. He played a lot last year, was not very good. He's been much improved. Jalen Jones is a converted wide receiver who struggled last year in his first year at safety and kind of came along. Those guys have not really had any problems so far through the first couple of weeks. Jalen Stroman went out in the first half against Vanderbilt and has not come back, and I would not expect him back anytime soon. Again, it sounds like it's like a broken collarbone. So those guys have been okay in that spot. It's really, maybe you can pick on Jalen Jones, that he's the guy who came in and replaced Stroman, and he had, I believe, the play in the Marshall game where they had that 69-yard run. I believe he might have been the guy that missed a tackle or was out of position. Mm-hmm. But those guys have been all right across the board. Nothing to, maybe not great, maybe not bad, just kind of average there. They've been all right. That has not been Virginia Tech's weakness by any strain or any means. I think those guys have taken a big step forward. So yeah, I'm very curious, how Rutgers attacks this group, because if you know that their linebackers are struggling, it's kind of like if you're an opponent attacking this Virginia Tech defense, I look at it as, if you can get by that first wave, get by that front four that's really, really good, you can kind of pick apart a little bit the back seven, specifically the linebackers. The DBs are a little bit better, but the linebackers, man, they're kind of in the middle of that defense, and they've just been very, very hit or miss.
So we've gone through essentially the entire Virginia Tech team, and I appreciate you being as patient as you were with us to answer all our questions. It's time to put the nose to the grindstone here, but let's get some predictions. Rutgers opened up as a 5.5 to 4.5 point underdog in this one. That line has moved down to around 3.5 or 3. How do you see this game playing out on Saturday?
I have Rutgers winning this game, and I don't know if that comes as a shock to you guys. I'm very curious to hear what you guys have to say. I think this one will be close. I don't think Virginia Tech has shown enough yet. I think Tech still has to get over that hump. This is a group that's banged up. I worry a little bit. Bashal Tutin is fine right now, but I worry if he gets a hit in the game. He played the second half with a brace on his knee. Virginia Tech needs him, and if something happens, I worry, because that kind of takes Virginia Tech's offense out of its game a little bit. I just worry about this run defense mostly, though. I mean, that's the number one weakness, I think, coming into this game, and running the ball is Rutgers' number one strength. I think it will be a close game, closer than last year. I think Virginia Tech will be in it, but unless the Hokies can stop the run on a consistent basis, which we have not seen yet, again, it's kind of like, when is this big play going to come? I think it's kind of Rutgers' game to lose. I don't think it'll be a shootout or anything, but I wrote down Rutgers 38, Virginia Tech 31.
Okay. How about you, Rich? How do you see this game playing out?
I'd be shocked if the score's that high. I just can't see. Rutgers is just the type of team that, if I say this every week, if Greg Schiano could win 3-0, he would do it. He would get the ball, get the lead, and that's it. Just run out the clock. But I don't know. It's interesting. You say the run defense is bad for Virginia Tech, so that kind of leads me to believe Rutgers has a very good shot. That's a better passing offense than Rutgers has had in recent history, especially last year against Virginia Tech. So I think that will open up some things as well. And even if they do sell out for the run, the pass game, it's been solid. Like, they got Dymere Miller, who's been really good. Chris Long was a leading receiver last week. I think Rutgers, I'm pretty confident Rutgers is going to win this one. I just don't know by how much. I've gone back and forth a little bit, so I'm just going to say 24-17, because I think it's going to be low scoring, and I think Schiano's going to take that lead and just run out the clock as much as he can and kind of just go from there. And I think they're going to win. I'm just not as – it really depends on injuries too. Rutgers is banged up just as much, if not more, than Virginia Tech. So it's definitely going to be an interesting one, though.
So I agree with what everyone has said. I think Rutgers has three main advantages. One, I think Rutgers has a coaching advantage. I think Schiano has shown, coming off buys especially, he really prepares his teams well. I think Brent Pry is still trying to kind of figure out a lot of things in terms of the style that Virginia Tech wants to play. And I think Rutgers is very confident in its style. And I think that's the second big advantage, is stylistically, what, like you said, David, Rutgers is a run-first offense behind an elite running back, and Virginia Tech struggled stopping the run. And third, it kind of leads me into this. Rutgers is going to have the best player in the field Saturday. Kyle Monongai is, the defending leading rusher in the Big Ten, and this year he's probably going to defend that title too. It's going to be close between him and Caleb Johnson up at Iowa. But this is a game, I don't think it's going to be super high scoring unless there's some weird turnovers. And I think Rutgers is going to want to basically grind this clock as much as possible and force Virginia Tech into positions they don't want to be. Like, they're going to, if the game goes the way I think it will, they're going to have to abandon the run a bit, because they're going to have to throw their way back into it. I think Rutgers ends up winning this one something like 28-17. I think they'll score late. It'll be a close game for most of the game, and then there'll be a late score that kind of pushes it into a final number that doesn't look as close as the game was. So I'm going to say 28-17. But David, we really appreciate you coming on, giving us all the time you did. Tell us where we can find your work and your social media handles and things like that.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. And I want to touch on one thing you said really quick.
Totally.
The out coaching part is very interesting. I look at that Vanderbilt game. That's Clark Lee. He's a former defensive coordinator. I thought Vanderbilt really outcoached Virginia Tech in that one. This is a coaching staff that is susceptible for Virginia Tech, that has been very hit or miss. I think Tyler Bowen and the offense will come out with a good game plan, but at the same time, I don't think I would bet against Greg Schiano in this one, especially Rutgers coming off a bye. I mean, you basically had 2 weeks, if you haven't been looking ahead, maybe even more, to prepare for this one. So
I think they have been looking ahead a bit and kind of holding back what they've kind of wanted to do playbook wise. I think you're going to see a lot of stuff that was not put on tape this year yet.
Yeah, that doesn't shock me at all. And I think that's kind of why I lean Rutgers in this one, along with everything else I said. So, yeah, guys, appreciate you having me on. You can find me at TechSideline.com. That's where all of our paid written content is. I'm on Twitter at @TheRealDCunna. Yeah, man, I'm excited. Are either of you guys making the trip down to Blacksburg? Will I see either of you guys this weekend?
No, those hotels are impossible if you don't book it ASAP. Yeah. I figured out.
We do have somebody covering the game, though.
Yeah, we'll have someone down there.
Alec Krauthamel, shout out to him.
Yeah.
Oh, you know Alec?
Yeah, we follow each other on Twitter, so I'm excited to. I think I met him. I think I met him in the press box last year, but excited to say hello to a familiar face again.
Yeah,
Yep,
awesome.
Still got the long hair and the beard, so if you see him, definitely shout him out and say hi. Rich, did you have any other questions for David?
Yeah, David, I got one more last one for you. So we haven't been able to do this the first 2 weeks because Akron and Howard have like 0 NIL at all. I want to know just more about how Virginia Tech is doing with NIL. And I know last year we asked you the same question. It sounded like it was up and down, but how are they doing so far? And I guess year 2 of NIL, year 3, whatever it is.
Whatever it
Tech,
is.
Tech is doing pretty well. There's at least one player on the team that's making 7 figures.
Yeah.
There are a handful of guys that are making about 6 figures. NIL has not been a problem for Virginia Tech. Not that Tech is in like the upper echelon or anything, but Tech has got people that are willing to pony up and keep the good players around. I mean, that's part of the reason why Tech returned so many guys last year. The NIL situation is really good. Now, that's all saying, yeah, the NIL situation is great. What happens if Tech starts to lose, right? The program is on a high right now. Coming off a great offseason. I think everybody's spirits were really, really high. I'm interested to see what it looks like this upcoming offseason. I think everybody's kind of curious about NIL and just like the longevity of it, right? I mean, this money's coming out of people's pockets. Like, at what point do they decide, hey, I'm going to keep the money for like my kids and my grandchildren and whatnot? But yeah, Tech has been pretty good on that front so far and not been a problem. It's more been we've actually talked about this on our own podcast, which you can go find on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Just search Tech Sideline Podcast. We've actually had this conversation before. It's like Tech has done everything right off the field to get to this point. Tech's recruited pretty well. Tech has won the NIL battles. Tech has brought in the right guys in the transfer portal. Just go win games. Can you go win games? And Tech has been very hit or miss in that department.
Yeah, you guys do a great job on your pod. I think I've listened to basically every episode since like July. So
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I've just been, like I said, I knew how important this game was. And so I've just been trying to absorb as much as I could about Virginia Tech. And you guys do a fantastic job. You guys do it better than any other outlet that I've found for Virginia Tech. So
100%.
Definitely check them out. They'll have a preview coming out tomorrow, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yep. So definitely listen to that because I know we kind of cornered David with some bad stuff about Virginia Tech. At least I felt we focused on. There's a lot of good stuff about this team too. So if you want to hear Virginia Tech's perspective, listen to that episode tomorrow. But for me and Richie, this has been another edition of the Knight Report podcast. Signing off.